Okay. Now, some critics say, well, economic factors are not the motive behind intervention, because the intervention often costs more than the investment that the U.S. has there. For instance, in the Philippines, the U.S. has spent something like $7 billion in aid in the Philippines over the last 30, 40 years to protect a U.S. investment that's only about $3 billion. So it can't be economical. It's uneconomical to spending $7 billion to protect $3 billion. You know, Thorstein Veblen answered this question over 100 years ago. He said, what you're forgetting, not about the Philippines, but I'll bring him in now as a voice. What you're forgetting is that the people who pay the $7 billion are us, and the people who have the $3 billion are them. And they'll spend $7 of your money to protect $3 of theirs. They'll spend $20, $50, $100 of your money to protect $1 of their money. In fact, when it comes to protecting their money, your money is no object. Furthermore, it's not just to protect direct investments, it's to protect that whole global system. It's to destroy and suppress any country that tries an alternative, self-defining, self-developing system, that tries to get out from under that enormous global system. So it's not just direct investment. The two most dramatic examples of U.S. direct military intervention, there was very little U.S. money actually involved. In Soviet Russia in 1919, 1921, most of the capital was British and French. And in Vietnam, half a century later, where almost all the capital was French, some British. But they went in to stop a competing system that would use the land, the labor, the resources, and the markets in a different way. Not for the enrichment of the few, but for the needs of the many. They went in there to defend their class interests, their class power interests. And that's what it's about. And now today you've got the U.S. saying not only that we want to preserve a global free market paradise, but it's got to be a U.S. global paradise. The U.S. has got to be the only superpower. And we will not tolerate the emergence of another superpower, even a capitalist one. And we will not tolerate the emergence of regional powers. Regional powers can cause problems too. We want you shattered, we want you broken, we want you weak, and we want you hungry, and we want you desperate. Because the hungrier and the weaker you are, the harder you will work for less and less, and the more I get for me. That's the name of the game, the expropriation of surplus value, the expropriation of a whole social order. Capitalism is more than just an economic system. It's a social and cultural and ideological order. And we have got to fight it and defend ourselves from it. Now, U.S. support of police state terrorism and torture, I want to return to my opening point, isn't an irrational policy. It may foster, it may feed off irrational fears, it may feed off irrational impulses, it may recruit irrational impulses. It may recruit distorted personalities who get off being torturers or bombing villages from a jet, and watching them burn and all that sort of thing. It may do that, but its goals, what it is directed at, is rooted in some very rational interests. In every country where the U.S. has gone in and done these things, where human rights, where economic rights, where political rights, social rights have been destroyed by U.S.-sponsored state terrorism, in every one of these countries, labor organizations have been destroyed or seriously mangled, wages have declined, profits have increased, tax laws have been made more favorable to transnational corporations, and the investment climate improves. Iraq is now another case. The Iraqi Revolution of 1958 was only partially overthrown by a CIA coup in 1968. By 1970, the agency of that CIA coup was a group known as the Ba'athist Party. The leader who emerged was one man named Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein then proceeded to murder, torture, brutalize every Democrat every progressive, every communist, every labor leader, every peasant leader, murdered them and destroyed the progressive forces of that Iraqi revolution, or drove them underground or into exile. Saddam Hussein was Washington's poster boy. He couldn't do any wrong. In fact, he was then sigged on to Iran to go do some dirty work there and try to overthrow this anti-American revolution in Iran. But he also did some other funny things. In 1972, he took an oil industry, which had belonged, back in 1958, had belonged to British and US oil companies. He took this oil industry and he nationalized it. And you know how this infuriates people in the West? You know how this infuriates oil investors? When these people in these countries take our oil, which happens to be in their soil, take it from us, steal our oil from us, that's oil which belongs to us. Well, it infuriated people, and they, there was the Cold War was on, and he was doing other things, so they left him alone for a while. Comes the overthrow of communism in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, scores are going to be settled. It's like Yugoslavia, too. We don't have to tolerate this guy anymore, they say in the White House. Saddam Hussein, I should add, was doing some other things, too. He started copying the left agenda to a limited degree, not with the same egalitarianism. But he set up education programs, he trained cadres of engineers, he put in public health programs. He did a number of things like this. There are many countries in the Middle East that have oil but no water. There are others that have water and no oil. Iraq was the only one that had both. It had a good ecological base. Yugoslavia did too. It was destroyed by depleted uranium from the bombings, which many of our progressives and liberals supported, those bombings against Yugoslavia. In Iraq, too, the same thing has happened. There's a very good agricultural base which has been destroyed by depleted uranium for infinite generations. I mean, what evil is this? How broadly can you define your own interests, and how narrowly do you define other people's interests, so that you can just poison them and destroy them and all that to gain some advantage for yourself, real or imagined? So Iraq had the highest standard of living in the Middle East, which isn't saying too much, but it wasn't that bad. War does some other things too. War also has domestic political advantages. War makes your leader a great hero. You know, we know some of our compatriots, don't we? We know some of our fellow Americans who never stop saying, who are quite capable of saying cynical things. Politicians, they say one thing to you to get elected, then they do something else when they're in office. They talk for the little guy, but they end up helping the fat cats. I mean, you hear people say that. But when those same politicians wrap themselves around the flag, and when they point to some evil out there, some threat that's going to come get you, why then our same compatriots suddenly discard their cynicism, discard their skepticism, and with childlike trust, they say, we've got to support the president. We've got to support the president. You know, I heard a student once say to me, he said, that's the difference between you and me. He said, I have faith in President Bush. He was talking about George I. He says, I have faith. I said, excuse me? You have faith in the president? What are we doing here, religion or politics? You have faith in Georgie Bush? Like my Italian grandma had faith in St. Anthony. You have a picture of Bush on your bureau with a little candle. You light it, you go, oh, Madonna, oh, Georgie Bush. He said, well, I trust the president. I said, there too, you trust the president? Trust, is that what we're dealing with here? Trust, which is something that you should reserve only for your friends and close companions or close family members. And even them, check them all out once in a while, right? You're all laughing, you know, right? No, democracy is not about trust. Democracy is about distrust. It's about accountability. It's about exposure. It's about debate. It's about getting the things out on the table. It's about challenging them. That's what it's about.